Right. Here's what normally happens at these events. We have like a Q&A. It goes quiet. There are no questions after a while. And then we go to the bar and we want to get drunk. And then everyone is like pounding the guest speakers with loads of work questions when they're trying to unwind and not do work stuff. So here is my little request. If you have a question, please ask it now, because my job later tonight is get these guys drunk. If they're up for the challenge. So, who wants to kick off with a question? Miggs, let's just give Miggs the mic, and you can just keep it, Miggs.
My question's for Mog. When the halving happens, will Hippias's pricing double?
Halvening.
Halvening, sorry.
So this is something that was addressed. There was a lot of misconceptions as to what actually happens with the... So in the simple answer to your question is no, unless there is an immense amount of buy pressure. The thing that you need to realize is the tau halvening is related to the liquidity being pumped into the pools. So it halves the amount of tau in. However, the alpha emissions, it has a separate emission schedule, it has its own alpha halvening. So what happens is you have less liquidity being put into the pool, which also coupled with tau flow means that initially what you would see is more volatility. So more popular subnets will have or those with more buy pressure will see an increase in price. Those with more sell pressure will see a decrease, and you'll have a slight exaggeration until this starts to settle after a while.
Cool.
Oh, I swear I'm going to get my cardio done for the year.
Thanks, Sam. Siam, at the start of today, you showed the list of some of the subnets, best this, fastest that, most efficient this, etc., etc. It's quite a high-level question I've got, but it's for anybody that wants to take it, by the way, but do you see the risk of a subnet or a bunch of subnets not being able to achieve the benchmarked value that you see from the existing competitors out there, closing that gap and ultimately making the value? What fundamentally are the risks to that not happening, in your opinion, if any? And the second part of the question is, to Joe Bloggs on the street, the Bittensor ecosystem is probably quite complex. Is that relevant to people generally, Joe Public? Is it irrelevant and you're going to make money irrespective? So what are the blockers of the Bittensor ecosystem overall getting to its potential? If that makes sense.
I can answer the first part. Is this working? Yeah, okay. You get deregistered. So so that list just basically says we're really good at X and Y and Z for these subnets. If you can't have that claim and you can't go and get market share, and you can't sell that story in the least of the case to the community, you get deregistered. For those who don't know what deregistration is, when you have a subnet and it is the lowest performing subnet on Bittensor, it gets wiped. It gets kicked off. Right? There's a very Darwinian element to Bittensor. So that would answer the first part.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but maybe not in my mind, because...
I think I understood your question. But that's failure. There's a line in the middle called mediocrity, which I think is what you're attaining to, where if you don't manage to meet those benchmarks of the competitors of which you're being judged against. Is that was correct in your question?
I mean, the best subnets could arguably already be at the best and the quickest, but they're not achieving right now, obviously. Is it just the early stages?
There's a reason why that particular diagram was not shall we say, so well received within the higher echelons of the Bittensor community because it states it as fact. And I think it's more stated as aspiration and where these subnets and companies see themselves heading towards. I wouldn't think it was fair, depending on your benchmarks, to state, someone from Filecoin might jump in and say, well, Hippias isn't the best decentralized storage network. Are you basing it on price? Therefore, it's the most cost-effective, or are you basing it on user numbers and terabytes stored or petabytes stored? But I think the reality of many businesses as they try to build up to each benchmark that they wish to cross is that there comes times in the growth of a business where it stagnates. Sometimes a business will stagnate and then push forward again. Sometimes they will pivot or reorientate. Sometimes they might focus on other aspects of the business. Sometimes they may just cash in and sell or fail. And I think subnets will face the same challenges as any non-Bittensor startup in terms of growth and achieving their goals, their investor obligations. And in answer to your second question, then I'm going to hand the microphone to someone else, the complexities of Bittensor, if the network achieves the infrastructure layer accolade that it should have, should not be needed to be understood by the customers of the products built on Bittensor.
Any other questions? Just give that man a mic and then hand it over to David afterwards.
Okay. I've got questions for everyone now. Again to Mog, is the reason you went with a desktop app as opposed to a web application?
As opposed to yes. You're syncing files on your computer. Do you use Dropbox?
Yeah.
It's an app on your computer, isn't it? You're not going. You use probably the menu bar assistant more than you actually go to the Dropbox site.
Yeah. Well, there is. I've used both sides of it.
Well, there is a web app already. If you
Yeah.
log into the Hippias console, that's a web version. But we wanted to make sure that you had a full siloed standalone version, especially through the payments processing. And also when you start to rent VMs and other aspects, it allowed us to make a cross-platform, secure system.
Dave, you have a question?
Hello. So this is a question that I might not put very well. So if you could help. So what's to stop the current 128 subnets being mostly scams, crap, non-performant, mediocre, whatever, and only a rump of made-up figure 20 being of any value whatsoever, and then, for instance, Alphabet turning up and buying half of them. So I'm talking about sort of like a quite destructive series of events. But what inherently stops something that sort of colour? It doesn't have to be exactly that scenario, but something like that happening. Does that make sense?
Well, I think your point about deregistration is the perfect point for that. That's if you get deregistered if your subnet isn't performing and people aren't investing it. And so if it is a scam or nothing's working, then that's exactly what deregistration is for. So that answers your first question. I'm not sure I've got an answer for the Alphabet question. If anyone wants to.
I think that like not to get like too philosophical, but like Bittensor is kind of like an evolution of what a company looks like, at least to me. So it's kind of like you have governments where people are least incentive aligned and they get the least done. Companies are more incentive aligned, they get more done. And then subnets are where you're explicitly rewarding people specifically for the value they create. So like a pay package is supposed to roughly look like the value you're creating, but when you have an incentive mechanism, it's even more accurate. And I think the best subnets like really lean into this, where you're basically basing your product and performance and improvement on explicitly defining what progress looks like and then rewarding for that. So, for example, like if someone were to buy Ridges, it doesn't really make sense to operate it without the subnet, because our whole bet is that we can improve faster because we're incentivizing only progress.
And so if you were to buy it, and like, let's say, for example, you just have our team, which, by the way, doesn't build the actual agents, what are you buying? You're basically just have like another team among like a sea of 20 companies, except we don't have the edge. We don't know how to build the agents as well because we're not like PhDs or anything. And so I think that a lot of the best subnets become the best subnets because they really lean into this and they make the subnet part of it the part that makes the business run rather than just like an accessory.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I've got a question about Resi, please. If I've understood correctly, you're going to make your money, your revenue from selling a service like a SaaS company. Is that right? You're not actually dealing with the tokenization of property yourself, are you? Is that right?
Wrong.
Okay.
The lion's share of our revenue and where we have partnerships now, one is complete, and as our product goes live, that will go live. Commertize, the one I showed up on the presentation. That is on a per transaction basis. When they sell a token, when they sell a share of this commercial property, we take a cut. Just like when you transact on Uniswap or any sort of centralized exchange or DEX, you are charged a fee. So we take a fee for that. And that is where we can scale, right? And that's where we can have this, I mentioned total value secured. We can have this explosion in the real estate industry, tokenized real estate industry, by not attaching ourselves and charging people a ton of money, but just coming along for the ride of their success, which is why we structured it that way.
Yeah, that you saying, that's a good analogy about Uniswap, because now I can picture it as you're the marketplace, and I can understand it better. The other question was, so when you mentioned the tokens, what actually is, what are the tokens? Like, what are they based on? For example, Ethereum, something else, or are they private tokens and not like tokens we used to, that you can buy and sell? So I mean, publicly, is it a different token or?
Okay, yeah, great question. So let's talk about the bones of the token. The bones, the value of the tokens of a commercial real estate property is in the form of shares of an LLC. So how it's done today is you have a property, and let's just say for the example, you buy it as the LLC, and then you tokenize it, right? Or you have a smart contract that says, hey, I want to buy this property or do this development deal that we were talking about, and you then get enough money in the pool to buy the property. You are then selling a share of that company, and when you do that on these platforms, today, there's no way to verify the value. So then what's backing it is really what's the condition of the property. In commercial real estate, it's not like a home, it's a business. So what is the cap rate is how we measure that in real estate. Hope that answers your question.
What I was getting at was, what's the actual token going to be made of?
Any network, yeah.
I mean?
Yeah, any network, sorry.
Oh, any, okay.
You can do this on Ethereum. You could do this on, actually, I don't know, maybe you could do this on Mog's chain, right? As long as you can make a token and accept capital, you can use Resi to show the value in that token.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I've got two questions. Firstly, a lot of subnets rely on other subnets for functionality, storage, compression, etc. But what happens, how would you handle the scenario if one of those subnets stops functioning for some period of time or completely dies?
How did we handle Cloudflare going down this week?
Well, yeah, panic.
We are obviously wanting to support people within our own ecosystem. This is where a lot of this comes from, and it provides a trusted proving ground. You know, we can integrate with other subnets, and it's like a closed beta where you say, look, you challenge us from a storage point of view, or from a compression point of view, or anything that a service that a subnet might be offering, and you have direct contact with the team who can often iterate and build features for you, so that massively helps. But failure would be the same as relying on any service provider. I've had RunPod GPUs close themselves for no reason, so why would I not rely on Liam? It's you put your trust in a storage provider or in a service provider, and if they don't provide a service that meets your needs, you move on.
Oh, I've got one more question. It's okay. So the second question is around pricing. So I used to work for an IT company. It created a product that they sold for £50 a month. They then went to the customer and said, we're going to charge you $1,200. And I was like, how can you get away with this? They're like, well, the customer's happy to pay because the product is worth that much to them. And it provides the value, and that's what the competitors charge. So I'm wondering, why do you price how do you get to your pricing? Why is it so low? Why not price it more aligned to what people are already paying?
I think what most subnets are doing is just like getting a share in the market. I think eventually you will ramp up the prices. I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like that's what most subnets are doing currently, just like get a fair share in the market. But I feel like I got a big no, so I would give the mic to you.
We research deeply the value that storage could be supplied for. If our miners are unable to supply the storage at the value that we pay them to enable us to resell it, then we haven't got a commodity chain. We're not buying cheaper from a supplier and selling it to a customer. So it can fluctuate. If suddenly storage becomes much more expensive to buy at a core level, then the price of storage across all storage industries will increase. But Bittensor allows us, initially through subsidization, but now through more economic tau flows, to really gauge a fair market price. And Bittensor has always done this. You look at the cost of subnets, the price increases with demand and decreases through a lack of demand.
Which part of it? First part or second?
How did you come to your pricing?
Our pricing? I mean, our pricing is pretty dynamic. We were initially planning to go at like $12. I wanted our first users, for the same reason that we have a whitelist, to be like super engaged, like almost like enthusiasts. And so $29 is like 50% more than, for example, what Cloud Code charges on their cheapest plan. Their main plan is like $200, but it kind of like gives us like a user set that like I know is like more engaged. They're trying it out for its own sake, and so we could kind of have like a lot more feedback, go back and forth with them. But like Mog, like as we kind of roll out more, we'll have to like adjust pricing. It's more just like an initial thing.
Well, yeah. So also, the other thing is, for our pricing, for instance, we don't have to pay massive R&D costs that you'd have to pay if you were a centralized company. So we can still undercut massively the centralized companies and still make a good profit on that because our costs are so much lower.
But you're not giving away profit in your case.
So I think you have to build up the company and you build up the trust first. I think someone asked a question about what's the barrier of people coming to work with subnets, and one of the things is that we're working in a crypto decentralized space, and that puts people off at first. So certainly for my clients, if we can build up the trust over time with a decent price and start winning smaller contracts, and then maybe eventually we could be more aggressive with our pricing once we prove the product.
Hey guys, thanks for everything today. I think it was, broadly speaking, really, really interesting to get some good technical analysis on different subnets and what's going on. So I preface this question with someone who is exceptionally deep in the Tau ecosystem themselves and exceptionally passionate about where the projects are going. But one of the criticisms that the ecosystem gets more broadly is that a lot of the subnets, if they existed outside of Tau, simply just wouldn't exist. Effectively, it's an alternative funding mechanism where, again, broadly speaking, the vast majority of subnets are not commercially revenue-generating assets and simply wouldn't last 5 minutes, quote-unquote, in the real world. So it seems to be that there's amazing ideas flowing through the Tau veins, but there seems to be certainly there's an interpretation that it's just a lot of thinking and not a lot of doing in terms of commercial revenue. There's all these great things happening, but ultimately, until those entities stand on their own 2 feet, it's somewhat concerning for investors, particularly when the markets have blood in the street like they do. Ultimately, you guys have teams, you have overheads, you have costs, you have salaries, And there's inevitably going to come a point where the value of Tau or the value of the subnets through market forces that none of us can control make the operation of those businesses not possible. So in terms of your understanding of those slightly more deeper than us as external investors, what's your kind of attitude towards the revenue generation processes, and what's your kind of rebuttal to an external person suggesting the vulnerability of that ecosystem?
Yeah, recently there's been a big update on Bittensor that essentially makes sure that eventually the subnets that don't bring in any revenue will simply just die out. So what currently is happening is that essentially a lot of subnets are actually being funded by the ecosystem, which in my opinion is a very good thing, because you don't have to like waste 40 hours a week on convincing like some old guys that you're the next big thing, but you can just start building. And Mog talked a lot about like the alphanomics, and I think essentially what it comes down to, if you like don't bring external revenue into your own subnet, your own token, eventually it will just die out. So I do agree that currently there's not enough revenue, but eventually the subnets that actually bring that in will survive, and that will make Tau and all the corresponding alphas big, and the other ones will just die out. So I think it's not a problem. I think it's actually a good thing that we don't have to waste time convincing people that we're the next big thing, but we just like start building.
Also, sorry, but people can vote with detail, right? So people, that's the point. If people believe in your business, you've got a good marketing plan, people can understand what you're doing, then they should be voting with the detail, which essentially makes it a successful subnet. So that's down to the individual's choice. So if you're like an investor and you're worried about your investment, then you can take it out and put it into another subnet where you believe in the team more.
You actually touched on one of the fundamental core principles of Bittensor and why we're so aligned with it. Your first part of your question was, would these businesses survive if they weren't a subnet and weren't being funded out or from Bittensor without a subnet? It's one of the core questions that we always used to ask ourselves in the early days, but not like that. We'd say, wouldn't this be a lot easier if we weren't doing it on a subnet? A lot of the things that we were doing with Subnet 19 and back in the early days of inference were being done by other small inference companies who went out there in front of a group of investors with a really strong pitch deck, raised 500 million, got their 2-3 years runway, and never had to go back and justify anything. But Bittensor makes you accountable. We closed 19 because we sat there saying this is not stable. Those guys are still burning through their 500 million, and then they can send an apology letter out to the investors at the end of the day. And it's this accountability and this fluid flow and assignment of capital makes you constantly have to stay on your toes. Otherwise, that runway is taken away. I mean, of course, the option is still there to seek outside funding from Bittensor, but it does provide an avenue to at least get quite far in. Well, I guess it depends on how you structure your subnet and your obviously your business flow, but it does give that opportunity to stay away from capital funding for as long as you need to.
So you could argue it's almost a sharper version of all finance mechanisms, because everything happens faster and it's more responsible.
Yeah, we used to say that it was an incubator and a runway provider, but Taoflow has now made it more of a fluid assignment of capital, in that you can see a subnet that's been around for a while come out with something where you suddenly feel you want to direct a lot of capital towards that by buying into that, and then if they don't deliver on that promise, that capital is taken away along with their emissions, while maybe they stagnate for a couple of months working through a problem or iterating on marketing, and then potentially they work through a problem and capital flows back again. And I think this is something that we'll see and is especially necessary once, let's say, 50, 60, 70 of the 128 subnets are strong businesses and we expand to 256 and beyond.
Question first hand.
Okay,
No,
I've got a question for Shaq. Is there when the product goes live, will there be a new pricing, for example, to not have your data be accessible or trained on, so it's completely private, or is it just going to be the same generic basic subscription as everyone else, but there's just a toggle that says, don't use my
Sorry,
my
when the
code?
what? I missed the first part of your question.
Is there going to be a different pricing for your code not to be accessed, or will you be able to have an option to say, this is private, don't share my code or anything like that?
For sure, yeah. So there's basically like two models that we're working with. The thing that we need to do right now is move beyond benchmarks and close the loop on like agents improving product performance, how they get compensated. To answer your question, there definitely will be like an option for some users to have a completely private mode. It's possible, like right now the thing we're experimenting with actually has that built in where the miners never see your code. The idea that we have right now is that when you have an agent that improves performance, if we have enough users, we drop it into like a random subset of users and measure whether they have like they prefer that agent, and that closes the loop. And in that way, basically, like it still runs on our platform. The miner never sees it. The alternative is that we have to build like benchmarks ourselves based on user data, but likely we just do like a plan that's like basically break even for us in exchange for sharing your data, and then we because like you don't need like millions of questions for evals for benchmarks. You want like several hundred. And then so you could kind of like go user by user and say, okay, do you consent to this code base and this problem being used as like an eval criteria?
Hi, gents. I have a couple of questions on TauFlow, so more maybe to Morgan, to the rest of you gentlemen. So on TauFlow, what did you guys think about as subnet owners? How will you direct flow consistently so that you have positive TauFlow to climb up the emissions ladder?
It was both convenient and inconvenient. It addressed a problem that was there. All of the subnet owners sitting on this stage are running very active subnets. They're very involved. So they probably felt some animosity towards stagnant subnets, subnets that were courting emissions that potentially didn't deserve them. And so we can all admit that it addressed a problem that we are highly likely all aligned with. That said, as a subnet owners, it also took the focus on whatever we were building, because we very quickly, if we were not, had to realign our incentive mechanisms to account for wastage. But some might say that that's our complacency if we weren't doing that in the first place, and it was having the very immediate consequences put in front of us. And I know Gareth will agree. You know, we'd discussed it previously, but it wasn't a priority because things were ticking over, and it suddenly very quickly became a priority. So as a steward of the network, it was very, very positive. As the owner of a subnet, it was inconvenient, but now we've gone beyond that. I feel it's a more accountable value scoring for subnet owners.
Thank you. And do you guys have any specific mechanism where whenever you get revenue, specifically fiat, will you then periodically inject it into your subnets, and then in order to climb up the emissions? That's basically.
I before TauFlow, I was against just recycling emissions back into what we call burn, because you're essentially taking the funds that you've earned through revenue and you're not reinvesting it into your business. You're just like doing share buybacks rather than hiring more engineers and more devs. So I still feel that balance has to be looked at and addressed, and it shouldn't. There are some subnets that have very low operating costs that can afford to do that. It's always going to be the way. You can look around at how other people are running their businesses, agree, disagree, learn, decide to copy or go down your own path. And I will stick by, for the companies that I advise, that it is important to continue, especially in this early stage, to invest money into the company and not just buying back. However, we'll also encourage and look into ways to tie up revenue and to tie up alpha to stem TauFlow, because we need to always be very conscious of this.
Thanks, Monk. And the last thing is, it's not really a question, but mostly a comment. And I work with enterprise, and I think as a community and as Bittensor as a whole, I think what subnets need to do is to abstract all the crypto side of things and just focus on the product in order to penetrate the traditional markets and enterprise specifically. I think needs to be one of the main goals of the subnet. Thank you.
Hey, just to add on a prior question, with Bittensor being permissionless, is there anything in place to prevent a chunky centralized organization buying up a load of subnet slots and using their existing infrastructure to gain a monopoly on their market, i.e. AWS competing with Hippias and
I would
obviously
say
copy and paste
controversially.
repeat as for any other subnet with a similar product.
Do you want to say what I was going to say, or
At dinner last night, we had this exact saying, and my instant reaction was they get deregistered. We unless they were performing right and providing value. Good night, right? We're not entertaining this. If they're providing value, right? We don't care if Google buys a subnet and does something really, really cool. It's not like we are at the end of the day, we're running companies, and there's some point of centralization, right? We're centralized companies running a decentralized network, right? So if Google comes in and does something valuable, hallelujah.
is there anyone from Yuma in the room? Was what I was going to say. A simple example. Yuma have added, obviously spawned from DCG, a huge amount of value to the network. That said, they were very prudent when subnets expanded and bought up a lot of slots. So they own a lot of slots. And they now have not trouble, but it's a challenge that they have to find teams that are of a high enough quality who then want to operate under their terms. Because obviously the big corporates that come in, they're looking for profit, so they have terms. And why would a subnet owner go to a corporate with terms that don't align with them unless they're able to add value? So the network continually has a churn. There could be a squatting and piracy of the network where someone just decided to buy up every single slot, but it would take a lot of capital. And I think that's a good question, actually. What if you just literally bought up every single subnet slot that deregistered?
They would get deregistered.
Yeah, you'll just get deregistered. You'll just be wasting your own capital, churning around on your own set of subnets.
So more from a competitive perspective, if AWS with their infrastructure compounded with Bittensor's infrastructure, could they squeeze Hippias out the market?
They'd be more likely to either, if they wanted the Bittensor functionality, they could fork the code. Bittensor is open source. They could fork a lot of Hippias because it's open source. I think they would be more likely in a very optimistic future to acquire us and allow us to run under an arm of theirs, probably wisely hiding the AWS connection for a while, and then onboarding the customers or seeing if they could monopolize or move some of their customers over to Bittensor. But this is a future quite far down the line that I look forward to having to make decisions on if we end up in that position.
I was actually going to ask initially about Yuma, but you kind of touched on that. So since the microphone's come back to me, I thought, why not try another question? And that be, assuming you can't say your own, which subnet are you most excited about other than yours? Or do you think it's going to be the best, biggest disruptor, etc.? And I'll open up to all of you.
After today, Shaq's 62, because I want to use his product and I can fire all my engineers.
Open to all.
Everyone. I think your subnet. It's really easy to understand. I think someone else was stating the fact that we should focus on making the product accessible for people without focusing on the blockchain part. And I think just compressing videos makes a lot of sense to people. So definitely buying some alpha after this meeting.
Nice, thank you. I like Bitmine. I think it's an incredible and very important piece of technology, especially working in the video space. I think fake news, as Trump calls it, is going to start dominating. People already can't tell what's going on, and I think the only way that you can have a AI detection, it has to be decentralized, because Fox News can't do their own AI censorship, so it has to be decentralized, and I think what they're doing is very clever, so I think they're going to go places, and everyone else on the panel too.
I think Siam is really cool. I think that there's a lot of stuff that is redundant. There's no inherent reason why it would be better than a centralized competitor, but having decentralized compute where it's completely permissionless and I don't have to. I've gotten kicked off by AWS many times, so it's cool having just compute that I know I can spin up.
I'm not just saying this because you're here, Mog, but I'm a huge Hippias fan. So I think that just commoditizing what Amazon's doing at AWS is, I mean, like I've been involved in startups for a long time, and some of the bills I've had to pay are just like gut-wrenching. And yeah, you guys saw that chart earlier today. So having that type of price savings is just crazy, and for it to be done in a decentralized way is like the like principles and value alignment that is super important. So,
Okay, maybe a follow-up. Now you can plead the fifth, and it's been recorded, so you probably don't want to say. But is there any that you think shouldn't be on Bittensor?
Yes.
You don't have to answer, obviously. But none of you said 127 either, so... All right, that's it.
Any other questions? Whoa. Any other questions? Yes. Is there a mic that side? Yes. Yep. Go for it.
Okay. All right. The question I'll ask is to you all. Given what's happened, I'm trying to be delicate here. Given what's happened in the US with its current political administration and the strained relationships, let's say, with its primary allies in Europe, there is quite a lot of concern at the government level to maybe perhaps not be quite so embedded in Microsoft, AWS, etc., especially with how poor the American data laws are and the massive NSA system that they basically do everything. Now, I'm not trying to paint one side as good or one side as bad, but do you see any future for you offering a solution to European clients who want to detach from what's happened in America and the...
Sorry, could you summarize that question in 5 seconds?
Yeah, sorry. I can't, no, you're right. To detach from American monopoly of data and services, is that something that's of interest to Bittensor? To allow companies to detach from US data laws and US software services?
Yeah, I think
So confused.
I'm a bit confused too, but I think I get where your head's at, and it is a big reason why we're in Bittensor, why we're using crypto and doing all of this decentralized work. Siam's been showing these amazingly funny meme videos, like at the pauses and breaks, right? It's talking about how stupid these major institutions are, and like they control our lives, right? Pablo and Paola, God bless their soul, but that wasn't their fault, right? The inflation that it was experienced in Argentina was not their fault. So whether it's software laws or whether it's being tied to a fiat system that is just printing you out of existence, there is a almost parallel relationship with, or inverse relationship with, the adoption of cryptocurrency and decentralized technology and the trust of government, whether that's on the fiat side or the capital side, or whether that's on the information side. I think that's along the lines of where you were going.
I was going to say that sovereign tech provision bias will always exist. And a lot of it is defined by the stimulus given by the governments, data legislation, GDPR. I'm speaking to an English audience who have segmented yourself slightly from Europe in some of the trade aspects. And so there's a lot of stimulus within France, within Portugal, to really grow homegrown tech talent. But yet at the same time, we're speaking to a panel who are advocating distributing the provision. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, if the NHS are to provision decentralized data distribution, do they require that data is stored in the UK? Well, then decentralization is not going to be the answer to those questions. So on a non-Bittensor level, yes, I absolutely think that sovereign data does, on a sort of government level, tend to err towards business within the country in which they operate. Otherwise, they would be open to criticism that they are stimulating other economies or throwing off your medical data to be stored in China.
Last question, Migs.
Okay.
Because I need coffee.
Okay. Well, with the interbreeding of subnets between you guys, do you guys have a disaster recovery plan should one of your subnets that you're using just stop working? Like you said, Cloudflare not working, Hippias is now out now. How does Resi function? How does video function? Because now you've lost your storage.
The simple answer is that we use backup. That's it, right? And you should have, not only should you have backup set up, but it should be a one-click type of deal for your team or something extremely similar to work on. There was a lot of teams, I don't know if you guys saw when Cloudflare went down, yes, it was a huge problem, but a lot of the teams that are staffed correctly and they do understand their mission as a company, they send out a tweet saying, hey, Cloudflare went down, but we have alternatives in place. Boom, it's up and live. Don't worry about it. So that's the same for us, right? We store data with Amazon right now. Our new incentive mechanism will be using Hippias. And then we're also storing data in 2 other places called Iris and then time and place, or time and space, something like that, I think it's called. So yeah, tons of redundancy, but thank God it's so cheap and thank God it's so effective.
My answer in jest is that Hippias keeps a copy of all your files on AWS for backup. But in all seriousness, the subnet, when we say the subnet stops working, obviously you were more talking about a storage provider stopping working. And from a business decision, if storage is your critical product or service that you're using or asset, it would be wise, as Resi pointed out, is to have backups. But from a subnet point of view, if you look at something like video, when we say stop working, we might be talking about a failure in the incentive mechanism, which is usually more often the cause of miners figuring out how to break something. That doesn't necessarily translate to your entire process stopping working, your product stopping working. If miners work out how to game the scoring mechanism, for instance, within Hippias, you might find that they're being rewarded for work that they haven't done. But that doesn't stop the underlying products on which it's built. It's just a temporary misalignment in incentive. And that does happen to subnets. That's part of the teething process of building a subnet and operating on Bittensor, and part of the skill is learning how to segment the different parts of your business so that that doesn't actually stop your product from working.
Awesome. Massive round of applause to all the subnet owners.